Before the sands of Egypt turned cold, before her temples became ruins whispered to by the wind, there was a time when her throne stood empty, not in body, but in spirit. Pharaohs still wore the crown, priests still muttered prayers, but the light of Egypt had dimmed. Its gods were silent, its heart had broken. The Nile, the river that once carried the dreams of kings, now carried whispers of rebellion. Northern princes warred among themselves, each declaring himself the true ruler, each raising his own army, each burning the cities of his rival. And while Egypt tore itself apart, a shadow stirred beyond her borders. Far to the south, past the great cataracts where the Nile churned like thunder, lay a land the Egyptians once called Ta-Seti, the land of the bow. Cush, a kingdom forged in heat and stone, its people dark as the fertile earth, proud and unyielding. For centuries, Egypt had ruled them, demanded their gold, taken their sons as soldiers, their daughters as offerings, their gods as trophies. But now the wheel of time had turned. In the city of Napata, at the foot of the sacred mountain, Jebel Barkal, a new power was awakening, and at its heart stood a man whose destiny would shake empires. His name was Pie, the birth of the vision. He was born in the house of Kashta, king of Cush, a realm where the river was narrower, but the hearts of men were vast. From childhood, Pie was different. He did not seek games or glory. He sought meaning. While others hunted lions, he climbed Jebel Barkal and listened to the wind. He said the mountain spoke, not in words, but in visions. He believed that Amun, the hidden god, had chosen him. In those days, the priests of Amun in Thebes cried out for salvation. Egypt's rulers had fallen into decadence, mocking the gods, stealing from temples, selling titles for gold. To them, Pie's message carried a holy scent: restoration. And so, as the world above him fractured, the young king looked north. He saw not a neighbor, but a kingdom in decay. He saw the divine lands of Egypt begging for order. He saw destiny. Pie gathered his advisors, his generals, his scribes. He said, "The gods have turned their faces from Egypt. They wait for a pure heart to restore them, and their eyes are upon me." None dared question him, for when he spoke it was as though the river itself paused to listen. The kingdom of the south before conquest came unity. Pie strengthened Cush from within. He built alliances with tribes along the Nile, forged iron weapons, expanded trade with Punt and Arabia. He rebuilt temples to Amun at Kawa and Napata, declaring that his kingdom was blessed by the Hidden One. Every festival, every sacrifice, every offering, all done in the old Egyptian way. But this time, not by Egypt. Cush had become what Egypt had forgotten: faithful, and that faith would become Pi's greatest weapon. He sent messengers north, to the priests of Thebes, to the governors of Upper Egypt, to the broken thrones of the Delta. He said, "Bow not to men of greed, bow to the one chosen by Amun." Some laughed, some listened, and one by one southern cities swore allegiance to the king of Cush. The Egyptians had once enslaved Nubia. Now Nubia was reclaiming Egypt's soul. The spark of war. But not all welcomed this southern tide. In Lower Egypt, a man named Tefnacht rose from the city of Sais. He was cunning, part general, part merchant, part priest. He dreamed of uniting Egypt under his rule. When he heard of the Nubian king moving north, he sneered, "Shall Egypt bow to a barbarian?" Tefnacht rallied the local princes, from Heracleopolis to Memphis, into a coalition. 20 kings and generals swore allegiance to him. They raised banners, sharpened blades, and sealed their pact with blood, and thus began a war that would decide the fate of the Nile. Pie watched it unfold with patience. He did not rush into battle. He waited until the Nile itself began to swell with its annual flood. a sign from Amun that the time had come. Then, with his generals and priests, he offered incense at Jebel Barkal. He washed himself in the river and proclaimed, "Amun goes before me. Egypt shall be purified." The army marched, thousands strong, archers from Cush, chariots from Napata, horsemen from the desert tribes. The thunder of their feet echoed through the valleys. The banners of the ram-headed god fluttered in the wind, and from the south salvation came wrapped in shadows. March to Thebes. As Pi's army advanced, cities fell without resistance. For many Egyptians, the sight of a devout king was a blessing long denied. At Thebes, the priests welcomed him as a son of Amun. They crowned him Pharaoh of Upper Egypt, the first Nubian to wear the white crown. In the great temple, Pa knelt before the golden statue of Amun. He wept not for conquest, but for restoration. He said, "The God has made me ruler of all lands. I shall not fail him." And then, with sacred oil upon his brow and righteousness in his heart, he looked north, to Memphis, where Tefnach's forces gathered. He said, "The god's light must reach the sea." The war was about to reach its storm, the siege of Memphis. Memphis, the city of the white walls, the ancient heart of the kingdom, was now the battlefield. Tefnach's generals fortified it, confident that no southern king could breach its defenses. But Pi's army did not fear walls. He ordered his troops to cross the Nile under cover of night. They did, swimming, building rafts, dragging their horses through the flood. By dawn, the Cushites were inside the city. Panic erupted. The defenders fell. Temples were spared, for Pa had forbidden plunder. He ordered his men to wash and purify themselves before entering each shrine. He bowed before Egypt's gods and proclaimed, "I have not conquered Egypt. I have cleansed it." The city surrendered. The coalition of Tefnach began to crumble. One by one, rival rulers swore fealty. Only Tefnach fled, escaping into the marshes of the delta. Even he sent a message to Pa, a plea for peace, and in his royal stela, carved in stone for eternity, Pa recorded the moment in words of fire. "I am king, the chosen of Amun. None can stand before me. I am he whom the god loves." The return to Napata. With Egypt united once more, Pa did something no conqueror had done before him. He did not stay. He did not seize the palaces or indulge in spoils. He returned home, to the south, to Napata. When asked why, he said, "Egypt is restored. The gods are appeased. My duty is fulfilled." But deep within, he knew it was not the end, only the beginning. For he had not merely conquered Egypt, he had bound the Nile's two souls into one body. From the jungles of Cush to the shores of the delta, the river now flowed through a single kingdom. The people called him Son of the South, Father of the North, the Pharaoh of two lands, the Black Pharaoh, the rebirth of faith. In Napata, Pa erected temples that mirrored those of Egypt. He built pyramids sharper and higher, as if to pierce the heavens. He decreed festivals of Amun that lasted 7 days and 7 nights, where golden boats floated on the river by torchlight. He revived the rituals Egypt had forgotten. And for the first time in centuries, the priests sang in unity again, songs to the hidden god, songs to the Pharaoh who had restored divine order. He ruled with humility, with discipline, with fire in his eyes. He believed the gods had used him as their instrument, not for glory, but for remembrance. And yet, even as peace returned, he knew darkness waits for every dawn. The shadow of empire. To the far northeast, beyond the deserts, a storm was rising. The Assyrians. Their empire grew vast, devouring kingdoms like beasts in the dark. They had already crushed Babylon, conquered Syria, and now their gaze turned toward the Nile. Pa's victory had restored Egypt, but it also drew attention. Whispers reached Napata. The sons of Asher march westward. The priest said, The gods test your legacy. But Pi was old now, his strength fading. He looked upon the river one final time, that long, silver thread connecting the heart of Africa to the soul of Egypt. He smiled. He said, "Let those who come after me remember, the South once ruled the world." And with that, the King of Kings, the Restorer of Gods, the Pharaoh of two lands, closed his eyes. The people built his tomb at El Kuru, under the sands of Nubia, facing north toward Egypt. They placed his favorite horse beside him, for he had ridden it across the Nile into glory. Above his grave they carved the words, "He who united the two lands in the name of Amun, may he live forever in the light of the sun." The world might forget him for a time, but the desert remembers, the river remembers. And now, so will we. The Nile ran red beneath the sunset, not with blood, but with the reflection of a kingdom reborn. From Napata to Thebes, from the burning deserts of Cush to the gleaming temples of Karnak, one name echoed like thunder across the ancient world. Taharka, the Pharaoh of the South, the Lion of Cush. He was not born in the palaces of Egypt. He was born in the black sands of Nubia, under skies that never knew peace. When he ascended to power, Egypt was fractured, divided between the memory of its glory and the corruption of its priests. But Taharka carried the fire of his ancestors and the legacy of the gods themselves. The Black Pharaoh did not rule like the others before him. Where others built tombs, he built empires. Where others carved their faces in stone, he carved their fear into history. He marched north with an army of dark-skinned warriors tall as gods, their shields glinting under the sun like bronze mirrors. Drums thundered across the deserts, and Egypt listened. City after city opened its gates to him, not out of loyalty, but awe. For the people of Egypt had heard of the man who claimed to speak for Amun, the hidden god, whose temple had long been silenced by greed. And when Taharka entered Thebes, the priests fell to their knees, not before a conqueror, but before a savior. Under his reign, the temples came alive again. Offerings returned to the altars, hymns to the heavens. The great temple of Amun-Ra at Karnak, once defiled by neglect, now blazed with gold. Statues of forgotten gods were pulled from the sands, restored and anointed with oil. Egypt, for the first time in centuries, was one again. And yet unity came at a cost. Far to the north, beyond the sands, another power was rising, a storm called Assyria. They were not like the Egyptians, nor like the Nubians. They were wolves draped in iron, an empire of cruelty and ambition. Their kings spoke of destiny, the right to rule the world through terror, and they saw in Taharka's Egypt a prize too rich to ignore. The Assyrian king Esarhaddon sent word to the Black Pharaoh. It was not a message. It was a warning. "Bow to Nineveh," the letter said, "or the rivers of your land shall carry your bones to the sea." Taharka read the message beneath the burning sun. He did not reply. He burned it. Assyria came like locusts, fast, merciless, endless. Their chariots thundered across the delta. Their soldiers marched with the discipline of machines. But Taharka met them head-on, with warriors who fought not for gold, but for the spirit of Egypt itself. The Nile became a battlefield. Arrows blackened the skies, and the air filled with the sound of war cries echoing between temples older than memory. And, for a moment, the impossible happened. The Black Pharaoh won. He drove the invaders back across the Sinai, his banners flying high over the deserts. The world whispered his name with reverence and fear. But empires, like storms, never truly die. Assyria returned, stronger, angrier, thirsting for vengeance. Their iron legions struck again, this time led by the new king, Ashurbanipal, the destroyer of nations. Thebes burned, Memphis fell, and the temples that Taharka had rebuilt began to crumble once more beneath the weight of fire and conquest. Still, Taharka did not surrender. He withdrew to his homeland of Cush, his body aged, but his spirit unbroken. He looked to the south, to the mountains, to the rivers that gave birth to his bloodline, and prepared for one final stand. In his final days, Taharka built one last monument, not of stone, but of memory. He gathered his priests, his warriors, and his family and spoke words that would echo for centuries. Egypt was not conquered by strength, he said, but by forgetfulness. We forgot who we were, the children of the sun. Never forget that the Nile begins in our land, and as long as it flows, Egypt will never die. When Taharka passed, the winds fell silent. He was buried in the royal cemetery of Nuri, beneath pyramids that still rise from the Nubian desert, sharp and proud against the horizon. And there, under the watchful eyes of the gods, the Black Pharaoh rests, the man who united two worlds and defied the might of empires. But history, cruel and restless, moved on. Assyria's own glory would fade into dust. The cities that burned Thebes would themselves be buried under their own ashes, and the world forgot the name of the king who once ruled from the mountains of Cush to the temples of the Nile. Forgotten, but not erased. Centuries later, archaeologists would stumble upon his tomb. Inside, they found inscriptions that spoke not of defeat, but of divine purpose. The cartouche of Taharka, carved deep into the stone, read simply, "He who restored the light." His image, broad-shouldered, crowned in gold, looked not like a man, but like a god returned to his throne. And perhaps that was the truth of it. Taharka was more than a king. He was the embodiment of a dream, the last breath of a civilization that refused to die quietly. A black man who ruled the greatest empire on earth when the world believed such a thing was impossible. They called him a conqueror. They called him a usurper. But in truth, he was something more. The bridge between two worlds, the north and the south, the gods and men, Egypt and Cush. And even now, when the desert winds sweep across the ruins of Napata, they carry his name softly across the sands, a whisper from another age. Taharka, the pharaoh who defied time.